Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. And as I continue to read This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, I was reading a section this morning where she talks about her disagreement with the idea that alcoholism and addiction to alcohol are related primarily to issues in the alcoholic or addict themselves, whether those issues be genetic, mental, emotional, even situational. Her feeling is that by focusing on the addict and the alcoholic and something that's different inside of them, we're taking attention away from the addictive nature of alcohol as a drug and wrongly placing blame on the person. And I'm trying to understand that. But on the other hand, I don't see a major problem with looking at the individual as being a very key component in the equation of how did we get to addiction. And I don't think that there should be any shame or guilt felt in recognizing that you, as an alcoholic or addict, are made up in such a way that you really can't drink alcohol or engage in drug use without losing control of that use or other aspects of your life. This is something that I guess goes back to, I was diagnosed from at a very early age with obsessive compulsive disorder. And I was about 10 years old, and it was a hard thing for a 10-year-old to understand. And I had some very good doctors who explained that this had nothing to do with anything that I had particularly done. This was not something that I was at fault for. It was a result of the way that my brain worked, physically, chemically, electrically. This was a result of the way my brain worked, and that there were some things that we could do to help with that. There was medicine that I could take that would help with that, and I had to take some responsibility as well and start to learn some different ways of coping with life, different ways of doing things in life, in order to address this particular issue. And so when I came into recovery and was introduced to the ideas in Alcoholics Anonymous and in recovery in general, I thought of it the same way. Yes, alcohol is addictive, 100%. But two, not everybody seems to get addicted to alcohol. And I think one of the ideas that Annie Grace is getting to in her book is that given time, everybody could become addicted to alcohol. And I don't know if I agree with that. Although I'm certainly no expert on long-term exposure, but I have seen so many people in my life who went the opposite way that I did, where we all drank very wildly in our youth, and then as my drinking escalated, their drinking slowed down. And as they started to enter different phases in their lives, they naturally just started drinking less. And their lives didn't suffer because of it. They didn't feel any kind of anxiety around that. They didn't feel any kind of loss from that. In fact, if I asked them about it, they would say, "Oh yeah, it's better now that I'm not drinking as much." These are the same people that I'll go out to dinner with them and they'll have a beer and then kind of forget about it. And by the end of the dinner, about a quarter of it still left in their glass, which is something I don't understand. I could never do that. And when I was drinking, I would have asked to finish their beer. So my point is that I still think that it's okay to see a difference between the way that an addict processes alcohol and drugs and the way that addicts and alcoholics are made up and the rest of the population. And that's something that Annie Grace argues is dangerous, as seeing ourselves as different. And I have to admit, I didn't fully understand all of her arguments. What I can tell you is there was one line that stood out to me where she said, "We also believe that addiction to alcohol varies from other addictions because the rate of addiction happens differently for each person." And I disagree with that. I do not believe that addiction to alcohol varies from other addictions. In fact, that was something that became obvious to me when I was in residential treatment and when I was, and as I've spent time in the recovery community. My addiction to alcohol, and as I've reflected on my own addictions, my addiction to alcohol looked very similar to my addiction to cigarettes, and those both look very similar to my addiction to marijuana, which, while maybe not as physical of an addiction as alcohol and cigarettes were, and didn't have the same markers of physical withdrawal as those, the mental addiction was still very similar between all three of those. And then my experience with addiction, when I talk to people who have experienced addiction to meth and heroin and cocaine, our experiences with addiction are all very similar. The things that we did under the influence of our drugs, the things that we did during withdrawal from those drugs, and the things we did in the name of those drugs varied widely. But our experience with the addiction is very similar. And our experience with coming into recovery and the relief we found there is very similar. So I think it's important to recognize that when we're looking at saying that the alcoholic and addict are different than normal people, which I don't like using that word, but it's hard to find an easier word to use. When we're saying that alcoholics and addicts have differences, that's not to discount the addictive nature of the drugs that we're talking about, but the alcoholic and addict do seem to have genealogical, physical, mental, emotional, and situational aspects of their lives that contribute to the likelihood of their addiction to these drugs. And so I think it's important to recognize that in any discussion that we're having about this. Too often with alcoholics and addicts, we want to place things in black and white. And to be honest, it seems like that's what Annie Grace is trying to do here, is really say it's this way, not this way, it's this way, not this way. And we've got to recognize there are so many contributing factors to what makes an alcoholic and an addict go down any particular role in their life. And we're still studying that. The study of these diseases is, if you want to call them diseases, if you want to call them disorders, whatever you want to call them, the study of these phenomena is less than 150 years old. And so we got a lot to learn. So that's it for today. I kind of rambled today because I had trouble following along with some of the arguments she made in the book today, and just felt like it was a good idea to express some of these thoughts about what really drives certain people to addiction and why we can't really worry about who's to blame. And it's not even about that. Let's look at what are the different contributors to the situations that alcoholics and addicts find themselves in. Let's not try to blame particular things in the alcoholic or addict's life, let's just look at all the situational contributors, recognize their import, and then use that knowledge to help us form effective treatment plans for alcoholics and addicts. That's all I got today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.